Productive Pastor 14, Personal Ministry Vision. What's going on, friends? Episode 14. Hope your week has been going well. Kind of switch back to the Thursday release day. Tuesday was going on for a while. A couple of weeks. But I realized, and especially with this episode specifically, Thursday release days are better because it gives me more production time. So thanks for being willing to kind of hang out with that. A little cool shift. Couple of things, just homework, but not homework, housekeeping. Let's call it that. Yeah. And this is all about you and how awesome you are. And I want to just direct you to a couple of things before we jump into the ministry conversation for today. Is this, number one, we hit the first big milestone in podcast land with over 1,000 downloads in the month of June. When I rebooted the podcast, I was really nervous because you remember the previous version of the podcast that had, I think we'd hit 100,000 downloads over the course of 4 or 5 years. And I was like, Chad, you got to be prepped for new world, not old world download numbers, those sorts of things. And so I'm just super stoked to have 1,000 people hit that download number. The next thing is this, the Productive Pastor community is the productivity party that you might find on Facebook. I feel like I've been saying for a couple of months that, there's almost 1,000 ministry leaders over there. And I'm looking at the number right now. Y'all, I'm not lying to you. This is Wednesday. We run a short production schedule here. We have 999 members in the Productive Pastor community. When you hear this, we very well might have had 1,000 come in there. And so if you're not part of the Productive Pastor community on Facebook, which is the Productivity Party, just give you one idea of the cool things that happen over there. A few months back, we talk about like apps is the favorite conversation now in the Facebook group. And we've been talking about Notion and Evernote and all the things, that kind of stuff. Steve Huffman is a community member, and a few months back did a private Zoom kind of going through Notion, and it was fantastic, but he had live data in there, so it could not be saved. So it was like, if you're not there, you didn't get the learning stuff. Well, Steve is awesome. Steve came back on, taught another Notion 101 in the community, did it via Zoom, but did a lot of work to make sure he had the ability to show this stuff and save it. And so if you're thinking about what does it mean to have a second brain, the tools, that kind of stuff, and you've not gone back and watched this yet, go over, check it out. It's in the Productive Pastor community. You got to be a member to find that. But it's a 30-minute webinar that he did, and he's good at that kind of stuff anyway. And you learn all about Notion 101 for ministry. That's the kind of things that we do over in the Productive Pastor community. The last bit of housekeeping to talk about is this. I've got some space left in my schedule for the next couple of months for one-on-one coaching and work. And some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is the things that I love to do and the things that I help people begin to move forward on. And if you are interested in this, there's going to be a link in the show notes, refchadbrooks.com/PPP/014, that you can go to set up a 30-minute exploratory call about what that might look like to work together, because there are certain things, we're in like a 101 phase right now with the podcast. That's why I've decided, let's hit basics, get basics down good, and then let's go a step deeper and a step deeper. This episode today took me more time in pre-production, I think, than any podcast episode ever has, because it's such an important thing. And what I wrestled with was, there are so many things I want to talk about that you cannot generalize in this sort of a conversation about personal ministry vision. So if this sort of thing is interesting to you, go hit that link, set up a 30-minute exploratory call, and let's look at what it might look like to take a few calls to work together on this sort of thing or other sort of stuff, because I love helping people just understand what does a healthy but also effective and actionable ministry look like in a really customized way. This isn't any sort of like a program we run through. Like, we just talk through these models that I have learned, I have found helpful, and that other people have learned and other people have found helpful through with that. So that's the end of the housekeeping. That's all the kind of stuffy at the beginning of the point. I've been babbling on for 4 minutes here. So let's get into the main bit of the content for this episode, personal ministry vision. So Henry Cloud, in his book, Boundaries for Leaders, which is a great, great read. I recommend it to my wife to read, and she kind of rolled her eyes at me a little bit at first, and then she finished it and said, Chad, yeah, this was a really, really good book. But Henry Cloud says this, simply stated, the leader's boundaries define and shape what is going to be and what isn't. That book opened up so many things for me a couple of years ago as I was in the middle of just a lot of reworking and rethinking about what ministry looks like. But think about this question. Why have personal ministry vision? Really, there's two kind of bullet points that we're going to unpack. First is this a biblical thing? And I'm going to talk about that. Take the time. But is personal ministry vision a biblical thing? And the second thing is I call it the problem of generalism. I'm a normal pastor. I'm now a bivocational pastor with 2 churches, and then doing coaching and development full time. We are pressured to be generalists because everyday normal-sized churches, there is a resource question that we all have right now. And so because of that, we feel the need, like we've got to be able to do everything, and the things we say no to, there's just a stress and a tension there inside of ministry. And so what does this look like? And I began thinking about this about 6 months ago and building out through some of these things I'm going to share today, and then kind of working them out the last 6 weeks as I've been on a mini sabbatical in a time of transition. So let's the first question, is this biblical? There's a biblical theology of purpose that I really have become convinced of over the last 3 or 4 years. Now, I don't go here often, not the purpose thing, but the theological side on Productive Pastor. But I'm going to go there today. That's it. I don't do that often. I'm going to do it today because this is the thing. When we dig into the larger world of the Old Testament and the New Testament, we begin to find so many things. And one of the things that I see is it's eye-opening to discover the motivations and the purposes behind what we might initially just gloss over. Now, some of the things are the situations that we find these leaders that we look up to, we find themselves in. We don't think oftentimes about how they got themselves to that place. But then we also don't know what to do with these, what appear to initially be horrible, sinful people and the decisions that they made to get to where they are. And then also we have the morally complex people. I think David is a fantastic example of this. David is the favorite Bible person to pick on Twitter. And I've participated in those picking ons before at time, but inside of Scripture we see this whole gamut of people, and we find this sometimes. And I think this sounds kind of weird to say this. I'm thinking about what we might call the horrible people aside of this. But think about this, and let's not discount sin. I'm not going to say but to discount sin, but look at the story of Hezekiah. This is one that just jumped out to me for the last few months. If we read his story chronologically, with the Chronicles and with Kings, and then also with Isaiah, and you think about Hezekiah's father, Ahaz, and just the larger situation that's there. And there's this incredible picture that we find in Scripture of Hezekiah having this showdown with an envoy from Sennacherib. I think I said that right, where he's like saying, this is all the things we're going to do to you. And he's telling him, well, hey, hold on a second. How about we talk about this in a different language? Because all of Jerusalem is listening to this right now, is becoming terrified. And Hezekiah came to a point where he had to make a decision. What the wild thing is, if we look early on in Isaiah, we see that his father Ahaz, who we think is a horrible person, like sacrifices, bad things, all the kind of stuff, he was put up with the same decision as well. And that, Isaiah is kind of there in both moments, and where we have it happen, there's this really cool decision point of Hezekiah having to make these decisions about the complexity of leadership. And his father had made a different decision. And when you boil down and you pull out the whole kind of like larger story at hand, both Ahaz and Hezekiah had to make a decision about how they were going to keep their people safe. This coming week, I'm preaching the lectionary text from Luke of the story of the Good Samaritan, and I've been thinking about the idea of what makes people bad in Scripture and realizing that 9 times out of 10, these people that we would kind of, air quote, call bad, they were trying to make the best decision that they had informed in their mind. Like, and that whole thing brings me to this thread that I've been contemplating for years in the book of Jeremiah, which I've been in this really deep dive into lately. But you have a recurring theme across Jeremiah about the priests and the prophets and their idea of falsehoods. And it makes you ask this question, why are they false? Were they horrible people? They might have been. Or where they're trying to survive and do what is right. In Jeremiah, false prophets are telling people that everything's going to be okay, and nothing's going to go wrong, and that's what makes them bad in the eyes of that book. But let me ask you this question: how much have we done that, and how much have we seen that happen? How much times have we participated in that, saying, "Hey, it's going to be okay, don't worry"? Think about the global pandemic that we just went through. How many times we have to tell people, "Hey, this is going to be quick. This is going to be okay." Think of the complexities of some of the leadership decisions that are there. And so I started thinking about this years ago when I was trying to understand what discernment actually is. Now, what does it not just be this word that we throw around, but then also, reading deeply into Scripture, into some of this decision making that you see people have to do, and this like wild gumbo, the biblical theology of worthlessness and worth and worthy. So we have a couple of things that are going on here that are important for us to think about. And I think kind of it places this inside of the larger story in a healthy way. And the first is this: I look back at those stories, those people in the Old Testament and these other things, and just like the larger humanity of the story and the idea of dealing with just kind of this biblical picture of call and decision, all this. And it's the question it makes me ask myself is this: how do I hold the line while remaining myself, and also my call that I know to be true to me inside of these heavy decisions that we have to make in ministry sometime? And I don't think I could have thought about that until I looked at these stories where I saw like this. It just made me think about the power of decision making. And when we forget that the way we do it, it might be the way that we protect and counteract of sorts when faced with just these big, huge, massive decisions, is we have to have a personal understanding of our call in order to lead through those things. And so I think back to, the understanding of Ahaz. Did he really understand what it meant to be called to be the king of Judah? Or these prophets and priests and religious leaders that Jeremiah was kind of always railing against. And he was railing against their falsehood, which there's another layer to that story there. But it's also, was this like a legitimate evil falsehood? Or was this maybe, hey, we're trying to keep people from going crazy while we are completely encircled by the Babylonians, who seem to be hell-bent on the destruction of the city and everybody who's inside of it? So that's kind of the first thing that makes me think about that. But the second is this, and I'm 42, I'm hitting over 10 years in appointed ministry as a pastor, and then another 10 years before that working in churches, is we get to a point to where we realize, am I where I was once aspirational and prayerful and extremely diligent and faithful to be? And what was this one place I felt called to be, 10 years ago, or wherever it was, is now that actually below what God is asking me to do inside of my call? The faithfulness to answering the call and following is not just something we do one time when we step into pastoral leadership. But what if we realize that our call to faithfulness is an ever expanding and ever moving part of this? And so we always have to be responsive and discerning as we are example on that call. So like those are the two things I think about inside of this just different conversation of sorts. We can jump into the New Testament and with what Paul says, that according to his purposes that we see that God calls people to. And then you have all the call narratives that we find in Scripture. And all of this stuff kind of brought together, and this is where I came to with it. We have this dramatic sense and understanding of holy calls inside of Scripture, inside the stories of church history. Whatever denominational tradition you are, think back to the call stories that you have. Think back to Luther's understanding. Think back, I'm not a Methodist, so John Wesley on the way to Aldersgate. We all have these moments of call that are part of the narrative of the people of faith. And so then how do we get to this place where pastors of normal-sized churches are so stressed out to where they feel like they always have to be just this responsive generalist who also is stressed to lead the church to amazing and big new things? And we can't do these two things at the same time. Friends, that is stress. Friends, that will make you crash. It made me crash. It made others crash. That sort of thing is crashing. And we find these examples of decision-making inside of Scripture. And also layer on top of that, I think that there is a complex that pastors have in a unique sense that we can develop where we feel the need to be saviors and we need to be martyrs. I'm not going to go into that deeply, but that's there. It's part of, I was talking with somebody earlier today and said, there is a unique pressure of workaholism that exists inside of ministry. I don't think us understanding, who God made us to be and how God called us, and you might be called Kyle, but and how God wired us uniquely, I don't think that is a bad thing. And so where is this massive disconnection happening? And if we realize that we're called to be disciples ourselves and that there's deliberateness that we're called to inside of this life with God, as well as just simply being people mature enough to be responsible, if we're able to reckon all of this, I think ministry will actually be more fun, it will be easier, and it will probably be more effective because we are healthy and we are having fun doing things easy and being more effective. So that's this big, huge stew of this idea of why I think it's not just okay for us to talk about personal ministry vision, but why it's almost like essential for us to be thinking about personal ministry vision. And that helps us understand this tension of generalism that we all feel. So Chad is stepping outside of that biblical theological moment that we talked to, kind of taking that hat off and putting on the typical normal productive pastor hat right now. So I want to talk about how this practically gets worked out. And really and truly, the last 2 episodes of the podcast kind of deal with this as well. I think you could call these 3 episodes almost a mini season of sorts. And so we're going to talk about this in 3 movements and kind of 3 just sections of this. The first one is who, the second one is what, and the third one is how. Now, the first one, who. This is all going to be personal stuff. And I'll tell you what, when I began just getting this together, I was going to make a big worksheet for this and all this kind of stuff, and I realized it is just too difficult for just a hands-off, fill-in-the-blanks type of method. This is the kind of thing that happens over time with conversation and intentionality. Like I said, if this sounds interesting or if this sounds necessary to you, hit up that link in the show notes about making an inquiry call, and I'd love to kind of jump on that ship with you. But I also do have a chart in the show notes to try to visualize what some of this looks like. So who? And it's really like, who am I in my vocational call, life with God sense? This is going to be a trickle-down effect. Our ability to answer the who question is going to begin filtering down to these next moments. Every decision, every piece of clarity that we're able to figure out will help make the next part of this easier. And this isn't Jesus Project Self, as John Mark Comer calls it. This is us taking what we're called to do really, really seriously, and us saying, Lord, I'm willing to come in and put in the deep personal work with you. I think so much of this is almost us as ministry leaders taking on that radical call of Jesus to become lesser, is that we're willing to just deconstruct our false sense of vocation and our own brokenness inside of this to discern and clear out who we are, who God made us to be. And so, who are we? So the first question to think about is this, what do I know I do, and what do I care about? What do you know you do? You might even put in there, what do I know I'm good at? Or what am I passionate about? Like I realized when I was doing this work on myself, I kind of clarified out the personal core value of I want to help people grow in their biblical literacy because I deeply care about Scripture. And I knew that no matter where I went, every single place I went in my last 20 years of ministry, I'm talking about Scripture with people. So I know that's a great example. I want to develop biblical literacy with folks. Second part of this is who am I when I'm at my best, and who am I when I am at my worst? Think about the best version of you in ministry. Think about the worst version of ministry in you. Some of the stuff we talked about in the last couple episodes. So how am I growing based off of past lessons? The good lessons and the bad lessons. Think about where you've kind of had to eat crow, and what did you learn? Did you change anything about that, or did you get stubborn and just stick to it? And have to deal with another situation? Or would you say, hey, wow, I really, really messed this up. This is what I learned. This is how I changed the way I do things because I learned my lesson truly there. It's all right for us to say we have lessons to learn. That's part of growing as a human. And you ask yourself this, where can I be constructing an understanding of my own theological values and my own vocational values based off of like what gets to the bottom of this filter? So like for me personally, so much of my own personal call story is the doctrine of entire sanctification. And I realized like that is a driving theological force in the way that I do ministry. So I know if I'm doing something and it's making me think about that or it's making me think in those ways, I'm being more honest to myself. There's a fantastic book that's called Manage Your Day-to-Day. It's put out by 99U. It's older. I've quoted it before, but it said this. Paradoxically, you hold both the problem and the solution to your day-to-day challenges, no matter where you work or what horrible top-down systems plague your work. So your denominational systems, your institutions, church members that drive you crazy, all that kind of stuff. So parentheses. Your mind and energy are yours and yours alone. You can surrender your day-to-day and the potential of your work to the burdens that surround you, or you can audit the way you work and own the responsibility of fixing it. Like I said, the doctrine of entire sanctification is a huge thing to me, and part of that doctrine is a tremendous amount of personal honesty. So that's why I know saying these things is kind of to the core of who God made me to be inside of this. And so it's, who am I? The second movement we take is this. What do I do? Think of the successes. Think of the passions. Think of the energies. Also, think about the things that you will almost always say yes to and the things that you will almost always say no to. Part of this is understanding how your own internal motivations are going to help you make good decisions if you're healthy, if you're in a moment where you're on the up and up, if you're in development mode, as I call it sometimes. But also think about how these decisions will cause you to make bad decisions because you're tired and you're personally unfocused. If you're thinking of strength language, when you're in the basement of your strengths. Think about this. What have I know I've done well? Like think back to past places of ministry. Like, hey, we did this and this went over great. Okay, why did it go over great? What's unique about who you are and your contribution inside of it that might be at the core of your being? Like, why did you make that do great? Another part of that is like, how do you feed the healthy and focused side of who you are? If you know there's certain things that you value and you've already, whether intentionally or unintentionally, begin making decisions to carve out more space and more focus and that sort of thing on that side of thing, where are you feeding the healthy and focused side of you are? These are areas of focus. These are areas of protection. I know I drop onto Preacher's Block 2 days a week at least to work on my messages. Because that matters to me and it just goes back into several different parts of my core values. I know that I am a teacher on the APEST, and I have to be feeding that. And if I'm not feeding that, there's nothing else. I'm not going to be making like reactive decisions that are going to enhance things or make things better or more effective or me more happier, honestly, than working well on teaching. And the last thing is this. We've done the who, we've done the what, and the last is how. So how will you lead the work? Now, some of this is based off of what your role inside your church is. You might be the pastor, you might be a youth pastor, you might be an XP, you might be a worship leader, you might be a Sunday, whatever this is. What is your role inside of your church? But then also, what is the things that you bring to the table? Like I know personally, I am not the executor. And the times where I've been pushed in ministry and pressured and stressed to be an executing person for a long stretch of time, like that does not go over well. But I know that when we need strategy, when we need innovation, and I do that, I am leading inside of what I'm supposed to be doing. I also need to realize is that when things are frustrating and I try to go strategy, I try to go to innovation and they're not needed, they don't go over as well. So that question of what is my role? Like what am I supposed to be doing right now? That kind of brings also, how are your unique gifts and experiences feeding your understanding of what the day-to-day looks like? This is how I'm going to do this. This is what you don't need me to do. This is the things that people do need me to do. Another part of this, how I will lead our work, is extremely important now as I think about it, but is this. What are the hard edges to your work? This kind of comes back up inside of the 99U book, the Manage Your Day-to-Day. But Mark McGinnis, he wrote a chapter in that. He talks about this in terms of understanding the difference between creative work and reactionary work. And I think the language of a creator is an interesting thing to think about in ministry. It's kind of weird, but it provides a good correlation, because creators are responsible, or creatives are responsible for managing and organizing, but they're also creating. Now, there are many places in church world now where we need to shy away from business language. I think we've learned that lesson, but I think that church leaders can really learn from folks who are working in just average, normal day ways, and that idea of the creator, they're creative, is a healthy and is an honest way to look at this. And good creatives are both making sure the business side of things is done, but they're also leaving the margin and creating the space in order for them to be doing the creative work that only you can do. Like if you're the pastor leading and running the church, but you never leave time to work on your sermons, there's some problems and there's some stuff to think about. Or if you never have time for the relationship side of it, or if you struggle to lead the committees and that kind of stuff, where are the ways that you need to kind of put some hard edges to work to make sure you carve and leave out time for that, because that's how you will lead the work, and you will do it differently than anybody else will do it. And I think there's also a time for us to say, like, when we close things down, like if we're going to lead and lead well, saying this is when we start and this is where we end, is also speaking to that personal value, because you're carving out, this is my personal call to work. But I also have a personal call to be a disciple of Jesus. I have a personal call to be in relationship with the people that are in my family and my friends and those sorts of things. And so creating a personal vision for ministry, it goes back to that Henry Cloud quote I shared at the very beginning of things. Simply stated, the leader's boundaries define and shape what is going to be and what isn't. And if we as leaders are living boundaryless lives, everything's just going to just puddle out and puddle up. And I think that it's okay for us to begin to have a personal vision for ministry, saying, I know God has called me for specific things. And while I'm here in this space, if I'm serving here for a year or two, or I'm serving here for my entire career, or if you are in a situation where you grew up in the church that you're now pastoring, in whatever time I am here, God made me to be a unique person in His image, and He's called me to do unique things. And it's the best thing for me to be doing this inside of that call. So personal ministry vision. Do me a favor. I'd love for you to hit back up either in that Productive Pastor community. We always have an episode thread, but just to come in there and just talk and wrestle about some of these things. I know that we've kind of been in a interesting conversation thread these last couple of weeks, but I feel like they're kind of where we need to be before we hit like some high other action stuff. I've got incredible interviews lined up to talk about a season where we're going to do pandemic pastoring, where we can learn from people and what they did and just hear some fun conversations there. And we also have like some great kind of like high level tactical things coming down the line for the fall. So I'm Chad Brooks, this Productive Pastor. Thanks so much for coming and hanging out with us in this episode. I'm glad to share this stuff with you, but I'm also kind of glad I'm done with it because I've been nervous about it. But I told myself before I jumped into this, if the worst thing that happens in this is us getting a conversation about personal ministry vision, then we've succeeded. So, friends, thank you so much for making this community what it is, because that's what it is. This is a community, and it's a great thing just to kind of be the ringleader of the circus. So I will see you back in the next episode next week. Until then, we'll hang out on the internet, hang out in the community together. See you over there.